Welcome to this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Andrew Seidel, FFRF's Director of Strategic Response, and today we're going to be talking about prayer at government meetings. Now, if you've got a question about this, please feel free to ask it in the comments below or email askanatheist@ffrf.org. That's askanatheist@ffrf.org, and we will take those questions live later on in the show and answer them to the best of our ability. So we're going to be talking about prayer at government meetings, and we actually have a live report from the Chicagoland area from FFRF staff attorney Elizabeth Cavell. At some point.
Hemant Mehta is an atheist blogger. His website, The Friendly Atheist, is a popular meeting place for the free thought community. He's also a resident of DuPage County, Illinois, where some change had recently come to the city council.
A couple of months ago, one of the newly elected county council members had brought up the fact that now that this new class has been inaugurated, what are the issues we need to discuss? And this was one that the idea of invocation, she said, why do we have these? If this new group is in, let's consider changing this around. And so I wrote to that county council member and I said, can I deliver an invocation? And I told her, I am an atheist. And she was awesome about it in the sense that she was professional. She just said, yeah, sure, I'll get you on the list.
Thank you to the DuPage County Board for having me here.
I was able to give a secular invocation, which I guess was the first one of that kind they had at those meetings.
You are the higher powers you've been looking for.
That also sparked another round of conversations about why are we doing this? Should we even keep it around?
Mehta's invocation struck a nerve with some of the more conservative members of the council. After much discussion, Councilman Sam Tornatore moved to vote on a measure to affirm support for the invocations at the very next meeting, Tuesday, March 27th.
Father of all and all that is good, we pray this morning.
As usual, the meeting opened with an invocation.
And we pray all these things in your great name. Amen.
Public comment on the invocation issue was surprisingly one-sided. 10 comments were offered, but only one was in favor of retaining the invocations.
As you are no doubt aware, the purpose of the county board is both secular and civic in nature, with no religious purpose.
I feel there's discomfort when someone attends a public government meeting like this and listens to a prayer given by someone from a particular faith.
I am happy for people who have religion to practice your religion. But when I come to a public government meeting, I shouldn't have to sit through your prayer, just like you wouldn't want to sit through me talking about things that I believe in.
FFRF attorneys Colin McNamara and Ryan Jane were among those testifying.
The non-religious community continues to grow, and the diversity of faiths represented among the religious communities continues to flourish and diversify further. With such a wide variance of beliefs, those tolerance that you said you value, Mr. Elliott, tolerance of inclusion, mutual respect, that's never been more important than now. My point is simply this. Not everyone in this room agrees in matters of faith, and that is fine. In fact, it's wonderful. But in a pluralistic society, in a pluralistic county and state such as this, we function best when government simply stays neutral in matters of religion altogether.
The practice of including invocations at each county board meeting places a legal Damocles in place for no good reason, particularly when the practice is not codified by a written policy. So I urge the board to make the prudent decision to simply end the invocation practice and just get down to the hard business of running a county.
The county councilors offered a wide variety of comments on the invocation issue.
We're here today to decide if our practice at our board is in the best interest of our constituents, since almost 30% of them would consider themselves non-religious, and a greater number of comments that I got from constituents who were religious but did not want to see a prayer at our county board meeting.
A 2-minute max, a 30-second or 1-minute invocation is not enough time to color our county board decisions by religious values or religious principles.
Noonan.
Aye.
Ozog.
No.
When the vote was called, the council upheld the practice of invocations.
11 voting aye, 6 voting nay, the resolution is adopted.
While Hemant Mehta wasn't surprised at the outcome, he was heartened that the conversation happened at all.
But hey, if it jumpstarts the conversation, then I'm glad that discussing it and talking about it everywhere else has been put to use in my community.
Liz and I had the pleasure of interviewing Hemant on FFRF's show Free Thought Matters. You can find that on our YouTube page. But here in the studio with me to help unravel all of the issues that we just saw in that report, I have Colin McNamara, FFRF Legal Fellow.
Morning. And
Ryan Jane, FFRF Staff Attorney.
Oh.
So you guys were the ones down there testifying.
Yep. Among many others, which was very pleasantly surprising.
Heartening to see that kind of
Absolutely. You do expect these things tend to get people riled up, particularly whenever there's a question of dropping the invocation or something. You do sort of expect that the religious community will get pretty amped over it, and we were really heartened to find that we were really, everyone was basically on our side in the public comments, and unfortunately that didn't carry the day, but yeah, very positive response in that community.
Yeah, and especially when the previous meeting had been so contentious and there was so much kind of fighting going on within the board that we expected that there would be a very large force coming out saying, this is a religious community, we need to have these invocations, and that was just completely absent from the public comment.
And we have seen that many times in the past, even where it's not an issue where the board is, for instance, voting on it. In our Chino Valley case, there was hordes of people holding up signs, pray, 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 after they lost in court, saying that the school board could not pray. So it is interesting that we were on the more vocal side this time. Any idea why that might be?
You have a theory, Ryan?
I mean, so we have...
because we're right?
That's a part of it, I think. Yeah, and I think also, so DuPage County is a very religiously pluralistic society, and I think people there kind of understand the issues with this. We have, FFRF, we have members all across the country, but we have a pretty good showing in DuPage County, a lot of members there, and I think that there's a sizable representation of non-religious people who just recognize that this is an archaic practice and it alienates non-religious people, it alienates minority religions, and in particular, also younger people are less religious than older people, and so if they want to get younger people involved in the government, this is just not a helpful thing to have. So I think that's why all of that is the reason that this brought people out.
And having it in the news for once, where, I mean, that was a contentious meeting, as you mentioned before. Hemant went in there and did this great secular invocation, you are the higher power that you've been looking for. Really a lot of great stuff in there, and it brought sort of attention to the issue in a way that we often don't see.
Yeah.
Now, you guys, you're both attorneys, you both testified. How did you divvy up your testimony then?
Yeah, so we didn't want to. We don't
want to say the same thing.
Yeah, we don't want to duplicate effort needlessly. Of course, Ryan and I are both very familiar with the law around this, but we didn't want to go up and just spout law at them twice. So we divvied it up where.
So I did that.
So Ryan did that once. So Ryan handled the side of things that was the legal implications, essentially. Well, I won't talk to your presentation, but for my part, I handled it purely from a matter of just policy. How does this affect constituents that come here? Do they feel alienated, unwelcome by it? Those sort of non-legal considerations. Whereas Ryan discussed, I believe the metaphor you used was the legal tightrope that you walk when you have invocations at your meeting. So
yeah, I tried to highlight a couple aspects because I pretty much just said, okay, everyone on the board knows this Grease v. Galloway decision took place, where the Supreme Court looked at this 5 years ago and said there is a narrow exception to the Establishment Clause when it comes to legislative prayer. Now, I am
essentially saying, look, there is a separation of state and church, but our government's been praying since before the Constitution, so we're going to go ahead and say that this doesn't count.
Right, and I am strongly opposed to that argument, but as of as the time being, that is the law of the land, so that's the world we're living in. So I said, I'm not going to come up here and tell you that it's per se unconstitutional to have prayers at legislative meetings, but there are a couple things you should keep in mind. One is that nothing in Grease v. Galloway says that you have to have prayers. They have every ability for the legislative body to just say, let's not do this. And then furthermore, if you do decide to continue with the practice, it is, like Colin said, it's a legal tightrope. There are all sorts of ways that you can slip out of that exception, and you're going to have problems. And in particular, this county doesn't have a written policy, so they have members of the board who could step out of line, or they could have new members of the board. When elections happen, board members change. You could have someone new who comes in there, and that's kind of what happened in Chino, where you had an influx of new kind of theocrats who just said, we're going to turn these meetings into church sessions, and we're going to have Bible readings and everything. And so I also urged them, whatever you decide, put it in writing so that you have it in very clear terms that this is what we can and can't do to make sure that we are not giving an appearance of endorsing religion.
And you're absolutely right, because FFRF has been successful in a number of cases where they've fallen off that tightrope, and we've sued, for instance, the Chino, where it's a school board, which is not the same as a city council or a county board. School boards don't get the right to pray under the Grease and Marsh exception that we mentioned earlier, or where they exclude atheists, which they didn't do to Hemmant, but where we've seen that happen, and we'll talk about that again in a little bit.
Or I think another possible case, and this is what I think Ryan was flagging for their attention here, and some of the other board members were flagging for their attention, to borrow kind of the phrase from Grease versus Galloway, if there's like a policy or practice of favoring or disparaging one particular group. And one member on that board, after the public comment period, stood up and had a list of every invocation given in the last year, and with the exception of one, which was from a rabbi, the rest were all Christian invocations, which is not terribly surprising.
Yeah, often typical. Now, let's hear some of the policy arguments. Law, it's very dangerous. You're likely going to fall off that tightrope. You could get sued. Could cost you, in the case of Chino, more than $300,000. So what are some of the other arguments against it, the policy arguments, the higher level?
Right. So the one that really stuck out to me, and I kind of directed it straight at one member, I watched the whole video of the last meeting, and it was very contentious. They were really trying to rein it in and keep the tone respectful, but some people were clearly pretty upset. And that was I think in one part because this had been made into a political issue, and of course it's really not. But one member said, as justification for keeping the invocation, pulled out some stats that I've seen a million times as well, and said, well, 71% of residents of Illinois are Christian, which is a pretty poor argument for keeping the invocation, and sort of shows your hand a little bit in even saying
why
that.
You're trying to do that.
Right, so, which is funny, because even that's not proportional to the number of invocations that was given last year, which were 99% Christian. However, I just pointed out, to that member, I believe that we had access to the same stats and drew different conclusions. Because it is true, I've seen the same numbers. It's that 71% of Illinois residents are Christian. Consequently, 29% aren't. And that's over 1 in 4 of the people you serve, approaching 1 in 3, who are either practicing a non-Christian faith, which is about 6%, or the other 23 who just don't have any religion whatsoever, and to whom praying in any context, let alone a government meeting, is probably an alien concept. And do you really want to immediately alienate those people as soon as they come into this room?
I think that's the key. It's not just that it's an alien concept, it's that it is alienating.
It is indeed. Yeah.
I mean, it's exclusionary by definition. You have this government that belongs to we the people, instead seeming like it belongs to we the Christians, which is exactly what the Bill of Rights is designed to do. It's designed to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority.
And there's a great related argument to that too, though, was that it creates an appearance of favoritism. There was a gentleman at the public comment who works for the county government. I was so heartened by this guy's testimony. He works for the county government, and he was opposed to the invocations. And one of the points he made, I believe it was him, I could be wrong actually, I may be crediting the wrong person. He said, if 2 people get up here and are in public comment and say, I'm in favor of Bill X, and I'm opposed to Bill X, and one person stands for the invocation and the other one sits and does not participate in the invocation, and then the person who participated in the invocation gets their way, how are you not to see this appearance of impermissible bias? How are they not to know that because they kind of played along that they got favorable treatment or something like that?
Yeah, it's coercive. It coerces attendees into participating in a religious ritual to a religion that they may or may not belong to. And it's your government doing it, so it's all the more problematic.
Right.
Now, did anybody make the argument, the Jesus Sermon on the Mount argument? No?
It actually didn't come up, yeah. So
It came up before at the last meeting, but not at this one.
Right, yeah. So
I think
maybe
they'd already exhausted
That's one of
that.
my favorite arguments.
I
Because
know.
if you're talking that 71% is Christian and we're doing this for Christians, Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount.
Let's flip open Matthew. And
Yeah, Matthew 6:5.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to pray, pray in secret, which an invocation does not do. Now,
Yeah. They already tried that one.
Talk to me about the impact, though. I mean, you said a lot of people came out, which is very heartening. What about how did things actually shake out, though?
So we lost the vote. They decided to keep the invocation practice. The vote was 11-6, which actually, in a way, is also some progress because in December, the reporting looking at this said that there were only 3 people on the board in favor of getting rid of the practice. So we're not sure whether it was yesterday's testimony or something else, but there have been a few other votes on the board to have apparently flipped and kind of seen that this is a problematic practice.
So it should have been a 14-3 vote according to the reporting.
Correct.
And instead was 11-6. That's I mean that's pretty good. That's solid movement. And I think one thing we need to keep in mind on these is it is, unfortunately, as the Supreme Court has said, okay for these invocations to happen. So we don't have the law as much on our side, and we are working on these policy arguments.
Yeah.
And we're not going to win overnight. We're not going to change everybody's mind overnight. But I mean, that's doubling the number of people opposed on the board. That's impressive. That's well done.
And I think it's important to note also that several board members on both sides of this issue were, during the discussion period, were highlighting things that their constituents had said to them. So, one of them said, here's a minister who wrote to me who said he thinks we should get rid of the policy. And then someone else, on the other side, they were saying, well, I got this many emails from people saying we should keep the policy. So it also really shows between the public comment and that discussion that there is a real tangible benefit to being engaged in this process and reaching out to your local legislators who, if you're the squeaky wheel, you tend to get the grease.
Yeah. To me, that is, I think, the biggest takeaway from this, because who knows how it would have shaken out if instead of 10 on our side, there had been 100, the way it happened the flip side at Chino. Yeah. Getting active in your government, which is something that FFRF urges its members to do all the time, is so important to creating the change. We can win these things in court sometimes, but right now the courts are getting more and more unfriendly, especially to our position. So it's critical that people get out there and get active.
Yeah, and you're right, we do tell our members to get active, and it's great to know that they listen, because there were several there in the room with us that day.
Now, one of the big things that was also happening right now, or happening that same time, I think it was the same day, or it may have been the day before.
Day
you guys
before, I
tested.
believe, yeah.
So this was in Pennsylvania. We saw a really wonderful and terrible example of why these prayers are so problematic. And it almost made the point you guys were trying to make in a more eloquent way, because it was so awful. Prayers are divisive, and that was, if you were going to sum up your testimony, that's kind of the way it was.
If I were to, if I hadn't already written remarks, I would have probably just played that video for the council, because it shows it actually shows the potential legality problem, as well as just the propriety of how this can go so horribly wrong.
So this is a prayer at the Pennsylvania House. It happened on Monday, March 25th. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Speaker. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you for this privilege, Lord, of letting me pray, God, that I, Jesus, am your ambassador here today, standing here representing you, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the great I am, the one who's coming back again, the one who came, died, and rose again on the 3rd day. And I'm so privileged to stand here today. So thank you for this honor, Jesus. God, for those that came before us, like George Washington and Valley Forge, and Abraham Lincoln, who sought after you in Gettysburg, Jesus, and the founding fathers in Independence Hall, Jesus, that sought after you and fasted and prayed for this nation to be founded on your principles and your words and your truths. God, forgive us. Jesus, we've lost sight of you. We've forgotten you, God, in our country. And we're asking you to forgive us, Jesus, that your promise and your word says that if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek your face and turn from their wicked ways, that you'll heal our land. Jesus, you are our only hope. God, I pray for our leaders, Speaker Turzai, Leader Cutler, Governor Wolf, President Trump. Lord, thank you that he stands beside Israel unequivocally, Lord. Thank you that Jesus, that we're blessed because we stand by Israel, and we ask for the peace of Jerusalem as your word says, God. We ask that we not be overcome by evil and that we overcome evil with good in this land once again. I claim all these things in the powerful, mighty name of Jesus, the one who, at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, Jesus, that you are Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Wow. Every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. You know, and if you go back and watch that video again, you'll actually see the speaker who introduced her, his jaw drops open at the beginning of it, and then he's shooing her off the mic by the end of that prayer. I think even he realized how problematic it was. And it is a perfect example of why these prayers are so problematic.
Yeah, well, and to make matters worse with that is it seemed to be a targeted timing, because this was the day that was it the first Muslim
legislator
was sworn in, and so their family was in the gallery to celebrate their inclusion, and so you'd think this is a great day for we finally have one person in the legislature representing our culture, and there's this immediate rebuke of just basically a prayer that says, convert to Christianity and repent your wicked ways.
It was very divisive.
A lot to unpack in that. Of all the things wrong with that, I don't want to parse grammar, but I'm pretty sure she said "I Jesus," which has kind of an I Spartacus. Anyway,
well, but I mean, if you watch enough of these prayers, which unfortunately we have to do, as it's cruel and unusual punishment here at FFRF. When you misbehave, we make you transcribe prayers.
Yeah.
But they say Jesus as sort of a verbal tick. They've taught themselves, instead of saying they injected Jesus in there. It's really kind of amazing.
Or a Lord God, I've seen that one a lot too. It also shows the importance of preparing your remarks before you get up. Don't just vamp, folks. It doesn't work. But that's exactly the kind of thing I warned about in my remarks yesterday in DuPage. I said after we had initially planned for Ryan to go first and discuss the legality, but so that he would have this base covered. But I was going to basically say to them, and I did, that if you're going to have a invocation policy that is open and inclusive enough to pass muster under the Constitution, under the Greece versus Galloway standard, one risk that you necessarily have to run, and this is that legal tightrope Ryan was talking about, is that you're gonna get someone in here who's gonna do that. Who's gonna get up here and say something disparaging or proselytizing, because you really don't have, once they get the mic, you don't have any control anymore. And if you allow this to keep happening, you're going to fall off that tightrope and be in legal peril, and you're going to alienate everyone in the room.
Yeah, not to mention they might be trashing your religion, and suddenly you're the one who's on the receiving end of this and saying, wait, what have we done here?
Not so fun anymore, is it?
Yeah. And we've seen that happen. For instance, in Arizona, when a secular invocation was given, it wasn't trashing any religion at all. It was a very, humanistic, uplifting message. But the Christians, legislators in the audience, got so upset that they had to go and deliver their own prayer immediately afterwards. And this is the central point. Religion is divisive, and when you inject it into our government, it's even more so. And that's the whole reason we have a separation of state and church in this country, is because the founders recognized that simple fact.
Take it off the table, and it helps everybody get along.
The government can be neutral, and nobody's favored, nobody's disparaged, nobody's using a government microphone to proselytize for their God and say that everybody's going to bow down to them.
Yeah. And it doesn't even happen that way necessarily either. I mean, it doesn't even have to be something disparaging or proselytizing. The example you just gave is a fantastic example. People can feel alienated simply because the prayer is coming from a faith tradition that they don't have, that they think is somehow hostile to theirs. I wish I could have isolated the soundbite, but this came up in the meeting yesterday, where someone said, one of the council members said, if we're going to be open, if we're going to be inclusive, we need to invite everybody. But imagine if a Wiccan came up here. And I thought there'd be more to that sentence, and then they just stopped talking. That was the whole thing. Imagine if a Wiccan came up here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my. Okay, so now you see the... What's that?
Or a Satanist.
Or a Satanist.
Yep. And there's a lawsuit on that in Arizona right now. A Satanist won in Alaska in state court recently. If you're going to allow these prayers, you don't get to say who can give it and what they can say, other than don't be disparaging. And the Pennsylvania House failed miserably. We should point out, too, that there's actually a lawsuit going on against the Pennsylvania House right now. Our friends at Americans United for the Separation of Church and State are suing on behalf of a bunch of local activists who, when the House was having a guest chaplain program, refused to let those non-religious Americans come in and deliver an invocation. Americans United sued for them. They won at the district court level. The House has since changed their policy, apparently. They got rid of the guest chaplains, and now they're only letting, as we saw, the legislators deliver the prayers. And that actually excludes one of the legislators, Representative Brian Sims, who's an atheist, is not permitted to give a prayer under their own policies. Again, we see how divisive religion is.
Yeah, so they have a whole box of problems with that particular policy that they're dealing with right now. Yeah. I also wanted to mention that in that invocation, she invoked Valley Forge and Gettysburg. Yes. So Andrew, Colin and I both had a run through editing your book recently, and I seem to recall that you touched on those issues. So do you have anything to add
to say about that scare quotes history?
Well, first of all, yes, you two are my bounty hunters. I had you guys site check and attack all the history on my book, which really shored it up. But yeah, she mentioned the prayer, Washington praying in the snow at Valley Forge, which is a very popular Christian myth. And this is one of the myths that underlie Christian nationalism. Didn't happen. We know it didn't happen. We know a guy named Mason Weems, who was a parson, a cleric, invented this myth. He's the same guy who invented the idea that Washington chopped down a cherry tree and then couldn't tell alive. It did not happen. I'm so sorry,
had that on
Colin.
Video.
The under God, that this nation under God shall not perish from the earth. That's a line from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address that everybody loves to quote, especially Christian nationalists. But it's actually not clear that he said that. We don't have a recording of it, so we don't know for sure. But his two first drafts of the Gettysburg Address don't include those two words. They don't include under God. Some of the later drafts did, but it was very clear that he was actually copying from news reports. So we're not sure whether he said that or not. And then the final one that she said was amazing in how wrong it was.
The best kind of amazing.
That the founders at Independence Hall, when they were drafting the Constitution, they fasted and prayed to found this nation on your being Jesus principles. So there's so much tied up in there that's wrong. One, our nation is not founded on Judeo-Christian principles. That's kind of the whole point of my book. And then two, we know that the founders didn't pray when they were drafting the Constitution. They actually specifically rejected a call to prayer, finding it, quote, unnecessary, according to
Ryan brought
Ben
up in his
Franklin.
testimony, by the way.
I did, yeah. Although I think it's a great example of how the people who are arguing for these prayers just love to cherry pick. And it's kind of, we talk a lot about echo chambers in this country, and it's a good discussion to have, because this is what happens is they get in the mindset of like, what can I say that will advance my chosen message that prayer is a fundamentally American thing, and that it's, you're unpatriotic if you don't pray and whatnot. And so they Google search it, and they get the same quotes that have been repeated over and over again, even though if they actually cared to look, they would see, oh, some of these are known fabrications, and so I think similarly, I brought up the Constitutional Convention, and I think that probably went in one ear and out the other, and then meanwhile there was a member of the board who stood up and said, well, at the Continental Congress there was a prayer. So it's
Gotcha.
like, I got, so.
So you mean before there was a Constitution?
Yeah,
that
famously
separated
pre-Constitution. You ever get sick of rebutting this stuff? Because what's so annoying in all this is that they throw out these fun little history tidbits, most of which aren't even true. But at the bottom of the matter, none of it actually matters anyway. It's completely irrelevant. We have a Constitution. These little fun facts are pointless and don't actually advance the legal argument in any direction whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating, especially because that's what the Supreme Court used in those two decisions where they upheld this, talking about history. They did exactly what Ryan was talking about. They cherry-picked history to say, look, we've been doing this for a long time. The founders must not have thought it was unconstitutional. They mentioned prayer at the Continental Congress before there was the Supreme Court focusing on something before there was a Constitution to interpret the Constitution. Yeah. It's kind of amazing. And the guy who gave that prayer, by the way, was Jacob Duché. Jacob Duché later actually fled to England. He turned against independence. He told George Washington that the Declaration of Independence need to be rescinded, slandered the Continental Congress, slandered the Continental Army, was kind of an all-around awful person, and not the guy that you want to hold up as, hey, look at this awesome
none
American.
of that matters either, but it is funny.
Now, we're gonna hopefully get a couple questions here. The one thing that I kind of wanted to ask you guys was just sort of as lawyers and as I mean, this is your second testimony, Ryan. This is your 1st Colin.
Yeah.
You know, how did you prepare for this at all? Did you, or you obviously didn't go up there and wing it since you just criticized?
I'm just that good.
You're saying I can do it, but you should.
Leave it to the experts.
Yeah, so we got together, of course, and decided how we were going to divide up what we were going to do. But then I thought it was actually kind of a fun process to picture myself being up there and saying, okay, I'm going to have just a few minutes to talk to them, and what points do I want to hit? So I wrote it out, and then we got up and met with all the other people too. And if there had been more time, it would have been great to discuss it with them too, so we could have had an even more coordinated approach. But as it is, I thought that everybody there did a good job of clearly preparing for it, and it's a good lesson in how it can be fun to be involved. That you find a topic you care about. Just take a time that you normally would be ranting on social media about this, and instead put it into a collected form that you're going to deliver to your local body that can actually do something about it.
I think that's the important thing too. You don't have to be lawyers working at FFRF to do this. There were 8 other people that were doing it.
And they did great.
Yeah, and that's the important thing. Anybody can go check out your county board, check out your city council. Are they praying? Tell them to stop. See what happens. Let us know.
Public comment period's
we'll do
for.
what we can help you out. Yeah. So we do have quite a few questions. Kelsey asked, when that Pennsylvania rep said, quote, that I, Jesus, am your ambassador here today, did anyone else for a second think that she was claiming to be Jesus?
You have one over here. Yeah.
And again, it's that odd verbal tick that they do.
Yeah.
It makes transcribing the prayers awful. And it makes it odd when they're speaking.
I think what happens there a lot of times is, they don't seem to know. I grew up in churches too, so I've heard pastors do this too. They don't know how the sentence is going to end when they start saying it.
That's
so you
100% true.
Oh yeah, they have no idea where it's going. Sometimes it works if they're really good at it. Sometimes, as you see there, it falls flat on its face, and you say weird things like "I Jesus" in the middle of your prayer.
Daniel Diaz asks, can we get the Satanic Temple to give a prayer in the Pennsylvania State House? Maybe they would realize how crazy they sound. They could quote the Bible where it says that praying in public is hypocritical.
Yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania is kind of a lost cause at this point. The Americans United has to finish winning their battle because, I mean...
It's a paused cause.
Right, yes, that's what I should say. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, until that gets resolved...
until they inevitably win.
Yeah, the answer is no. They're not going to allow a Satanist to come in and give the invocation because they're letting legislators themselves give these horrendously divisive prayers.
Even though under the current policy now, it's legislators doing it themselves, the Satanic Temple would not be allowed under the previous policy either. Because from my understanding of it, their policy was explicitly that you had to be some manner of theist.
Yeah.
You had to be praying to some higher power, whatever it is, and the Satanic Temple explicitly excludes any higher power. They are effectively atheist. So
yeah, distinguishing Satanists generally from the Satanic Temple specifically.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I thought that the question.
Yeah. No, it was. It was just for other viewers.
Yeah.
Also, though, this is. The Satanic Temple does a very good job of highlighting why religion in the public, in the government, is so divisive. Nobody wants a Satanic Temple monument on their Capitol grounds, for instance, but 71% of the country is perfectly happy to have a Ten Commandments monument up there, even though the Ten Commandments promise to punish innocent children to the 3rd and 4th generation, treat women as chattel, and allow slavery in 2 different spots.
And there's that part about boiling goats, but that's in a different,
different version of it. Yeah. Well, and it really is the same discussion, isn't it? With when you talk about displays on religious displays on government property, things like nativity scenes, where there's always the same line that they say, well, we want to open this up to everybody. What could be more inclusive than opening this up to everyone when they know what's going to happen is that the majority is going to have the lion's share of the representation, and that's the only reason they want to do it. And that hypocrisy is exposed when groups like the Satanic Temple show up and they say, okay, we want to be represented too, and then they say, shut the whole thing down. We don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah, well, and that dovetails nicely into Damon Hartford's question. He says, I don't get it. I'm not religious at all. No one is forcing anything down anyone's throat. If you're not religious, don't pray. If these people want to pray before a meeting, then that's their choice. It's not like they're coming into our homes and doing it. Do you think that them doing this is forcing you to pray?
Yes, I mean the short answer to I think is to say, like, no, in a literal sense, no one's being forced to pray. Yeah, they're not saying get out of the meeting if you're not going to participate in this prayer. But that's very much beside the point. I think what's going on, the right way to look at this is just this is a religious practice, and in actuality, it's a particular religion that's getting all the representation of this practice. And the question is that an appropriate thing for a governmental body that's representing the entire community to be doing? So it's not about whether people are being forced to participate. The question is, should the majority have the ability to insert their religious practices into the government body? And so when you look at it that way, I think I don't see any argument to say, yes, they ought to be able to do that.
And I'm not willing to let go that there is no coercive pressure there. I don't think it's true. In fact, I heard people say that at the meeting as we walked out yesterday about how they go to these meetings and how they feel obligated to stand and bow their heads even though they don't want to. Ryan and I were there yesterday. We sat for the invocation. Of course, we don't live there. So we don't have to deal with this community all the time. We don't have to deal with people giving us sideways glances. But if these are your friends and your neighbors and your county legislators, you're going to want to kind of win their favor. You want them to be on your side. And if you're going to sort of, I think, naturally, just due to the coercive environment, play along with things that violate your conscience. The Supreme Court, it's one of my favorite Anthony Kennedy lines, if you can believe it. The Supreme Court said that the government can no more use social pressure to enforce orthodoxy than it may use more direct means. And the truth is the government never uses direct means. I mean, almost never. I shouldn't say never, but you never hear of people getting their hands pushed together. In this arena, sure, yeah. I have heard of people being in state houses. This happened in that Pennsylvania case of people being chastised for not standing for the invocation, being told by, I guess sheriffs or deputies or what have you, Capitol Police, that you need to stand. That itself is coercive, but it's not always like that. There is this. It's a coercive social environment, and there's no need. It's absolutely needless to be subjected to that at a public government meeting.
Well, and there's a more realistic point here too, Damon, which is that even if they agreed with us and decided to do away with the invocation policy altogether, nothing is stopping any of them from praying.
Yeah.
They don't want to be seen. They don't want to pray. They want to be seen to be praying. They want to use their government office to pray so that all their constituents can see how pious they are. If they wanted to pray, and that was the important part of this, before the meeting went in, they would go in and bow their head and they would say their 90-second thing and it would be done. They don't have to do it as a group, as government officials, but that's what they are trying to do.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it was pointed out yesterday that after Hemant's secular invocation he gave, several members made the sign of the cross.
Yeah.
And when asked about it, people brought it up in the public comment. They're like, we noticed that you made the sign of the cross after that. And they said, well, that was me saying a prayer to myself while Hemant gave the invocation. So, so you're perfectly capable of doing this on your own.
Yeah, that's
you can solemnize the occasion all by your lonesome. You don't need anyone's help.
And that goes too to something that I don't want to nitpick what any of the other public commenters said too much, because overall I thought it was they were all wonderful. But one thing that just as a matter of phrasing, I wouldn't say something a particular way, is they said, you can pray in your church and you can pray in your home. You don't need to pray here. And I think that's a slightly wrong way to phrase it, because the reality is, of course they can pray here. They just don't necessarily get the apparatus of the government to deliver that prayer.
Don't use your government office to do the prayer.
But you can
broadcast your prayers.
Yeah, but you can quietly or privately pray while you're in the government building all you want.
All right. I think that's an excellent point. Now, we've got one final question that it's not related to government prayer, but it's kind of fun anyway. And I haven't talked about this because I've been on vacation. But Sally Ferrante asks, do you have any response to Trump signing Bibles in Alabama? Isn't that a violation of the separation of church and state?
Is he Jesus? Is he the author?
Right.
I mean, typically that is the case. You, as an author, would sign a book, and we know that Trump probably thinks of himself as God.
Yeah.
But certainly not the author of the Bible.
But
I don't know that he's written anything.
He's used to putting his name on books he didn't write.
True story.
Yeah. But but probably not a violation of the law. Very, very strange, in keeping with the Christian nationalism of this organization, of this administration, certainly. But I don't know where your legal hook would be.
Yeah, legally speaking, I think if someone comes up to their favorite politician and says, "Can you please sign X," no matter what X is, yeah, they can sign it. Whatever.
I can't imagine the hubris of signing what you believe supposedly to be a sacred text, though. That's, of course, chastising Trump for hubris is just shouting into the void at this point. But still,
I mean, it does. But it does go to that point that he claims that the Bible is his favorite book, and it is this sacred text.
He loves 2 Corinthians.
And he loves 2 Corinthians, and he can't name a favorite verse, and all kinds of good stuff. So,
well, they're all his favorite.
Well, and my favorite thing was that I saw that someone who got their Bible signed immediately turned around and sold it on eBay, which is just the most American thing ever.
Are you surprised? Oh, capitalism at its finest.
Yeah. But I mean, overall, this does go to a more central point to tie this all together, in that religion's not just divisive when it's mixed with our government, but it is also a tool for manipulation. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons the founders really wanted state and church separate. So it may not violate the Constitution specifically, the legal aspects of it, but it certainly violates the spirit of that, because it is using religion as a political weapon.
It cheapens politics and it cheapens religion. I think that's a great example of it.
Yeah. James Madison said that religion and government will both exist in greater purity the less they're mixed together, and that quote popped into my head as soon as I saw him signing those Bibles.
And to their credit, a lot of churches came out and said this is not something we approve of whatsoever.
Or at least it's weird.
On that note, we are going to end this episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. Join us next week, Wednesday at noon, on FFRF's Facebook page for another episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist.